you know, my Instagram account, if you look at it, it's like, it's not just, you know, kind of like, I don't want to say like sugary coated posts. There's like some pretty, in my opinion, there's some pretty like significant stuff that repeats itself. Obviously, one of the things that I deal with is the number 33, right? Now, for better or for worse, you know, if you just look at Christianity, you know, Christ performs 33 miracles. He's crucified at the age of 33. Okay, that right there is like, all right, maybe it's just the story. But then if you get into the Scottish Rite of Freemasonry, it has 33 degrees, right? And there's things that are like correlating or corresponding in Freemasonry to Christianity. Okay, maybe it's like a coincidence, right? But then you have certain things that occur on certain dates, okay? For instance, I just heard somebody talking about this, and this is really fascinating. In fact, I heard it like this morning. I was like listening to this podcast, and you know the Rodney King beating? Okay, so that happened on 3/3, March 3rd, okay? And I want to say he was struck 119 times, or for one, I'm sorry, he was struck. If you look at the Wikipedia entry, now don't get me wrong, Wikipedia can totally be manipulated. But according to the Wikipedia entry, if you go, he was struck 33 times, 33 blows with the baton, and he was struck for 1 minute and 19 seconds. Now, 1 minute and 19 seconds is 9/11 backwards, right? So you have this. Who the fuck? No, I'm kidding. It's probably my doorbell. My doorbell rings when people open the door. So if they push the door, it rings, which is totally inconvenient, but you know, it happens. So anyhow, but interestingly, the guy who filmed the Rodney King beating, you know, you gotta ask yourself, like, what, did this guy just randomly have his video camera out, or he saw the cops roll up and he was like, oh, let me get my video camera out. As it goes, the story he tells is that he was filming, like, I think Terminator 2, and they had just finished wrapping up Terminator 2, or I don't know if it was Terminator 2 or Terminator 1. So he's literally, and this is the story, like LAPD, when they get this guy's footage tape, it literally has behind the scenes filming of them filming T2, and then it like cuts to the Rodney King beating. And you're like, wait a second, what? So now, James Cameron, right, blah, blah, blah. Is it possible, now the Rodney King beating, and I'm gonna sound like a complete fucking lunatic, which is what I fear, but the Rodney King beating goes to have one of the most polarizing effects at that time on race relations in the United States, okay? It causes a riot. The riot leads to, you know, X, Y, Z, but the Rodney King beating, and then the next thing is like the OJ thing. So now, and then you go on to, we'll leave 9/11 out of this, because this is like, 9/11 is like the granddaddy of like polarizing events, where to the point where like if you, after 9/11, if you saw like a Muslim guy or like an Arab, you're like, oh my God, is that a terrorist? So it affects your psyche in these ways that like, you know, now this sometimes becomes like more efficient than waging physical warfare, because you can control people psychologically with this stuff. You know what I'm saying? You can create kind of like gaps in relationships, human relationships, that could go to achieving like peace and the you know, consciousness expanding. But instead it inserts a divide. It's almost like a negative energy, right? So you know, there were certain people that suggested that these psychological, I shouldn't say these psychological operations, but psychological operations could be very convenient to folks who wish to divide society up. Because now you don't have to wage physical warfare on people. They will literally divide themselves and they won't have unity, right? So the Rodney King thing was interesting because it happens on 3/3, you know, yada, yada, yada. The king, the concept of the king, going back just into, you know, even Jesus Christ being labeled as the King of the Jews, you know, yada, yada, yada. But so I found it interesting that they were talking about this concept of the James Cameron. Now, James Cameron is a whole other entity unto himself. You know that you know where James Cameron was on 9/11? He was down in his little pod filming the Titanic. So now that alone is pretty fascinating, right? Because he comes up to the surface and they tell him, hey, 9/11 just happened. And he's down filming the Titanic. And the concept of the Titanic, the unsinkable ship, is pretty symbolic unto itself. Yada, yada, I can, you know, this is like spinning out, but, you know, and I'm not trying to like convince anybody that this is like gospel, but I just find it personally interesting when you see numbers that might have some sort of like resonance or significance in repetition. You know, for instance, another random one fairly recently was the Hamlin, when that guy had that heart attack on the football field. Mm-hmm. Okay. Now, and I talk about this in my Instagram account. What happens is he has this heart issue. He collapses on the field, and players form this ring, right? And they're kneeling. And the only guy that's not kneeling in this image of this famous, you know, photograph of this instance is a guy whose number is 33 and his last name is Neal, right? Neel. And I'm like, man, that is just super interesting, because now when you start getting into Freemasonry, what is Freemasonry? It's like this shadowy kind of like religion. Is it a cult? Is it a fraternity? Well, it's a combination of a bunch of different things, but part of their Masonic like ceremonies involves kneeling, right? And, you know, taking the knee, and, you know, the initiation, you know, whatever process has these like, you know, ceremonies and the degrees and blah, blah, blah. But, you know, long story short, and that might have sounded like some, you know, classic rambling, but I'm just interested in like, you know, the sort of like things that we are maybe unknowingly indoctrinated on a day-to-day basis that we might look at and not have any significance, but to someone else, they've just involved you in this process of possible, you know, kind of like, I don't, you know, it's maybe psychic warfare is like a little bit too strong, but just a little batch of psychological, you know, kind of like whatever it is, you know. So that's my rant, you know, whatever.